Thank you for joining us tonight on Indivisible. I'm your host, John Stubbins. Thanks for joining Indivisible with John Stubbins this evening. America, as you know, people are leaving in droves from California right now and obviously New York City. And we're going to focus on New York City tonight. I'm sure everybody is aware of Cuomo and his inability to handle the resources that were given to him to help our elderly in assisted living and senior living facilities and nursing homes, and a lot of unnecessary deaths in the state of New York. But Bill de Blasio is the mayor of New York City, and that's going to be our focus tonight. And besides people leaving in droves right now and a mass exodus in New York City, if you don't know why, I'll tell you why. You've got no bail policies there. You've got, he came out today, de Blasio, with a statement that we need larger amounts of redistribution of wealth, which just about blew my mind with everything else that's going on. He's already decided to take out the Special Investigations Unit of the NYPD, as you know. And of course, the murder rate has skyrocketed. Crime has run amok now. It's riots, burning, looting. It's no wonder that people are leaving. So, with all that said, I want to bring on now Cathy Bernstein. Cathy is running in New York District 10, 10th District for U.S. House, and she has an amazing background, a super smart lady, accounting background, and she's running against Jerry Nadler, of all people, who I gotta say, he says that the violence that's happening in our streets is a myth. Welcome to the show, Cathy.
Thank you so much, John. It's an honor to be on your show, and I'm really thrilled to be here and to be with your audience tonight to tell them what's going on in New York City. So I'm Cathy Bernstein. I'm running for Congress against Jerry Nadler. It's a very large district, and I'll just go over it for those folks who aren't from the area. It's the west side of Manhattan. It starts on the Upper West Side. You have Midtown West, Hell's Kitchen, Chelsea, Soho, the Village, Greenwich Village, Tribeca, the Financial District, Battery Park. It sort of skews over more to the east side. But right there in Manhattan, so you can see my hands, we're talking the entire west side. And then it has part of Brooklyn. It has Borough Park, which, for those who don't know, has the largest Orthodox Jewish population in the country. I'm going to put my hair up. And it's also got Kensington, Red Hook, Sunset, parts of Bensonhurst, Dyker Heights, and Gravesend. So yes, my background is accounting. I'm a CPA. I've worked in a big 8 accounting firm. I do financial consulting. But what really defines me is my activism, politically, socially, and civic through the years, and being a New Yorker. Sure. I'm a 4th generation New Yorker, as you can tell by a very heavy accent.
Love your accent. Love it.
Yeah, I joke. My son is a 5th generation New Yorker, and I've lived in this district, the Upper West Side, for the past 35 years. In terms of political, I am a moderate Republican, which fits the area. But I am part of the New York State Republican County Committee as a member. I am the treasurer and the board member of the West Side Republican Club. And people always laugh when they hear that. You mean there are Republicans there? But yes, we're here.
I was just getting ready to ask that.
Right. I've been endorsed by the Manhattan GOP, the Brooklyn Republican Party, the New York State Conservative Party, the New York State Chair, Nick Langworthy. I just recently picked up a new endorsement from the New Journal PAC, which Excellent. Is James Golden. Excellent. It's Bo Snerdley, and what they're trying to do is engage minority voters in, challenging their perspective and becoming conservatives in voting. So I'm running on 2 tickets. I'm running on the Republican ticket and the conservative ticket. And I'm very proud to be on both tickets. I'm very proud to be endorsed. And obviously, I'm bona fide conservative-wise to be on both tickets.
Well, we're definitely glad to have you here. And by the way, before we get started on the agenda for this evening, I want to say during my 3 years living in New York City, thank you for being so welcoming. When I lived there, Giuliani was the mayor, and my experience was pretty darn good. I have a lot of fond memories of New York. Now, even with Giuliani, there were things that happened that aren't normal for me coming from Ohio. Like, I'll give you an example. Sometimes our school would get out late, 10, 11 o'clock at night, and I'd take the subway back to Brooklyn Heights, get off on the subway, the doors would open to the subway, and as soon as I stepped out and looked left towards the steps, I'd see a big huddle of rats disperse, and I had to walk up those stairs. And I used to tell my mom, when I'd report back home, let her and dad know how I was doing, and they'd say, "Oh my God," they couldn't believe that I had to walk past that at night. And I said, "Mom, I got used to it." That's one of the downfalls of living in New York. It's like, I heard one time, I'm trying to remember the lady that used to date Billy Joel, and they lived up Central Park, huge. I think they paid like $3,000-4,000 a month just to park their car. So you know how expensive it is to live up Central Park. Well, even in those high rises, in those expensive places in New York City, some of these people still had roaches. Okay, and I'd tell Mom about that, and she'd freak out. Roaches, because she couldn't stand any bugs. I thought it was kind of a little lighthearted because, in New York, it doesn't matter how much money you have. You live in a high rise like that. They've been entrenched underground for so long that you can't. It doesn't matter how much money you have. You can't. There's certain things in New York, no matter what, that they're always going to be there. So anyway,
there's nothing I can do about the cockroaches. We could talk about the rodents.
No. I just a little lighthearted fun for those that don't understand. Okay, but let's get to some of the issues. I know that one of the things that you wanted to talk about was the SALT cap. Tell us a little bit about that, Cathy.
So, I'm approaching this as a New Yorker, and obviously, when I described myself about who I am, being a New Yorker is a big part of who I am. And so obviously I'm going to be fighting for New York as the next Congresswoman. It's the cap, the $10,000 cap, and it really hurts New Yorkers. We are already paying some of the highest taxes in the country. So then for this to happen, it's one of the reasons. Well, there are many reasons, but it's one of the reasons why New Yorkers are leaving. And it's interesting because Jerry Nadler's had almost 4 years to work with Donald Trump, explain the situation, work on behalf of his constituents, and help them with this burdensome tax burden that we have to face every day. And he didn't spend one day doing that. He was just for attacking the president. And, to get things done in Congress, you sort of have to reach across the aisle. You have to want to make something happen. I mean, we can discuss it later or another show, but the HEROES Act, it's also nicknamed the Zeros Act, because while it has some fabulous things in there, it also has some items that Republicans would never consider or allow. And one of them was paying illegal immigrants a check, not only for this time, but going back and paying them a retroactive check. We don't really have the money for that. And so when you add these things into a bill, they don't get passed. And in the end, it's a great grandstanding effort, but you hurt the constituents because they don't get the money or the services that they really desperately need. And that's what's going on here. But so jumping back to the SALT cap, Peter King started it. It's a bipartisan bill. It didn't really pick up. He did it in terms of phasing out the cap, and that would be something I would like to go forward with.
Yeah, and look, Nadler, all he did was fight the president, trying to impeach the president. Him and Pelosi and Schumer, and on top of that, now again today, with all the taxes and all the people leaving, now de Blasio comes out today and says that he wants to even further tax New Yorkers an incredible amount of money to not only pay illegal aliens, but for reparations and for wealth redistribution. This guy.
You have to understand, de Blasio also spent part of the last few years campaigning to be president, which I'm always confused why we're paying someone a salary to go to another state. I mean, we had a major blackout here last summer. I don't know if you recall.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. And he wasn't here for it. He was in another state. Those are the things that hurt you.
I remember that.
But we have an issue right now going on. All of New York State, you're allowed to eat in a restaurant with social distancing. And we're very cognizant of the virus here because we've lost so many people. I would say, I personally know people that have died. I would say it's a little bit like 9/11 where you knew someone. And so it's much more painful for you. So we're all understanding of what's going on, but we can socially distance in a restaurant. And instead, the mayor is still holding this up. And his reasoning was, and this was really appalling, was that it is really a service for the middle and upper class to eat inside restaurants, forgetting about the people who own the restaurants, the waiters, the busboys, everyone who has a livelihood involved in that restaurant. And if we don't have the restaurants open for inside dining, some of them will close forever. And if you walk through New York City right now, you would literally cry when you see all the shuttered stores that will never open again.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting when you mention him because he is a very progressive mayor.
Yeah.
And yet, when we had the riots here, we had one incident which was captured on camera, put on Twitter first, which seems to be the beginning of the news cycle, and then everyone catches on. And it was a scene of a bunch of men who had surrounded a police car and were banging on it, pushing on it, potentially pushing it over. It was very frightening. And the police pushed a bit on the gas pedal and they got out of the way. Now, even de Blasio said, if you're going to do that to policemen inside a police car, they might react that way. But Jerry Nadler on Twitter put a picture of that and blamed the police.
Right.
So This is a guy who's even more progressive than our mayor.
Yeah,
and that's
no doubt.
So frightening.
No doubt about it. Nadler,
I'll give credit to Jerry Nadler for one thing. And, Biden, you don't know what his positions are, especially with this fracking. He's for it, he's not for it. He said he was, he doesn't remember, who knows. But with Jerry Nadler, and I give him props. He keeps the same positions. I mean, if you even went back to Occupy Wall Street, which was under Bloomberg's when he was the mayor, and he wanted to clean it up. It had become a homeless encampment at that point. Nadler protested and said, it wasn't right. They had taken away these people's voices. There were no voices. They were like intense. It had become just a tremendous mess down there. And if you want to talk about rats, these are the starts of things, these encampments.
Yeah. And believe me, I followed that whole mess leading up through the Trayvon Martin story in Ferguson with BLM and that whole nonsense. But look, this guy, Nadler, okay, he's an obstructionist, number one. And he may be consistent on his positions, but his positions are insane. They are insane. They're not good for America. They're not good for New York City. And we've got no bail in New York City because of de Blasio.
But John,
looting.
it makes it easy for me to run against someone like this, and it makes it easy
Sure.
for people to decide who they want to vote for. Our positions aren't very close at all. The things that he cares about, defunding the police, and it's interesting because he went through and it was an interview in a local paper here called the West Side Rag. It was for the primary, and this was before they defunded the police, and he was adamantly for defunding the police. I'm not for defunding the police. I feel like the police should get more money. I'm just amazed they even come to work. The conditions they have to work under are just horrific now.
Yeah.
And there's certain areas that I feel are sacred that you would never cut. I would never cut the police. I would never cut the firewomen, and I would never cut sanitation. But these are areas where necessarily Jerry Nadler doesn't have a right to encroach on. They're somewhat mayoral issues, but he's coming right in and voicing his opinion very strongly that he is for defunding the police. I am not. So these are issues. He was for letting the prisoners out of Rikers, the early release. And we can discuss that later. I am not for that.
Yeah, and that's not working out well.
He is for sanctuary cities. I am not for sanctuary cities. So when I said what I like about him, it's not this moving ball where his position is one day this or something another day. He's very clear cut. He's a very progressive guy. I am not a progressive woman.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. And look, besides look, if you're a police officer, I don't care if you're in New York City or if you're in Seattle or Portland, it doesn't matter. If you're taking bricks to the head, okay, and people are throwing urine on you and deciding that they're going to gang up and decide to shoot police officers and sneak up on them and knock over elderly people on the street and, loot and steal and burn and assault. Look, there's no room for that in America. And we cannot sustain that as a country, because if it continues to go that way, we won't have a country. The country will be gone. I want to hit on something real quick before we move on to education. The elderly, and this is something that it's just like Benghazi. I'll never forget this. But the way that the elderly were treated by New York, by the state, by Cuomo, by de Blasio, in these nursing facilities, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, is just despicable. There were so many deaths that could have been avoided, but John,
it's a very painful subject, and I will tell you that many of my friends lost their parents during this virus. But after everything we learned, that you don't put people that might be exposed to COVID with elderly people. And we can touch about the homeless shelters here. In the Hotel Bella Claire, which is on West 77th Street, in the spring, pretty much after the deaths had happened, they put a group of homeless, more young people, 30s, 40s, 20s, in that hotel. And there was already elderly individuals who were residing in there. They did complain. They were afraid of getting sick, rightfully so. These new people weren't wearing masks, and their pleas fell on deaf ears. Now, where was that hotel? In my district, in the 10th Congressional. So the elderly are ignored everywhere, and I will touch upon that. But let's keep going.
Sure. And look. Again, I don't want everybody who's paying attention out there that uses common sense, that has a brain. This guy, I can't let this go. This guy Nadler says that what you're seeing on your television sets with your own eyes is a myth. He says it's a myth. And by the way, for everybody knows me, I used to bartend on the Upper West Side, 50th and 8th, and I bartended on the Upper East Side at a college bar called Mad River Bar and Grill. So I understand both sides of town, and I loved it in my time in New York. Thank God I was there when Giuliani was there. But let's talk about education. I know that is a big part of what's on your heart, Cathy, and the oversight of Catholic and private schools,
So
charter
let
schools.
me talk about this, because I think if you're in New York, you're cognizant of what's going on, but perhaps in the rest of the country, they're not. And I know you have a national audience. I mention this because what gets approved here in New York and California somehow makes its way across the country. And what's going on here, it's really disgraceful, would be the best way to describe it. New York State, the Department of Education, wants to have oversight into private schools, Catholic schools, and yeshivas. And they're talking about 35 hours of education that they want to implement into these schools. And if you're a parent, you want to choose a school that's consistent with your religious beliefs or traditions. There's just not enough time in the day for you to learn, I don't know, the Old Testament, the Talmud, and also learn what New York State would like you to learn. In addition, you're paying for this private school education. I know it's greatly offensive to many people, and especially I jumped when I said that Borough Park was the largest Orthodox population outside of Israel, which is in this district. Their kids go to yeshivas. They don't go to public schools. And now you might be saying, well, Cathy, that's a state issue. Why are you talking about it? Because Jerry Nadler, with the use of his bully pulpit, decided he would like to speak about it. And he was asked, and he expressly stated that he believes New York State should have oversight over these schools. And it's just, it's really terrible, would be the only way to describe it. And as your next congresswoman, I'm adamantly opposed to that.
Yeah.
There's some other issues probably we should talk about too in regards to schooling.
Sure.
And that's the charter schools here in New York. It's a conversation that's often discussed. There's never really anything done. The Democrats are opposed to charter schools. They're tied up with the teachers' unions, and there seems to be little thought about the kids. And the problem is that these policies really hurt the poorest, because who goes to the charter schools here? Predominantly, it's low-income minority students, and their scores at these schools is significantly higher. I know for the African-American students, it's like 24% higher in math. I think the Hispanic are 22%, but we don't have enough charter schools. And if you saw the lines of parents that, show up to get one of these like golden tickets into the school, it's a bit heartbreaking. And, this is a congressional issue, because you can ask for federal money, for these schools, and yet it's not done.
Yeah.
And I guess we should also talk about the other. Everything here is just sad. The other sad thing that's going on here is we have high schools. They're sort of the jewels of the system, and one of them I'll talk about is Stuyvesant. They had over 10 L'Oreal winners there. It's a school that has a lot of low-income students. It's not a school that's owned by any group. In the 50s, you had Jewish kids who went there. And right now, the mayor and the chancellor are trying to wipe out the test that lets you into this school. And instead, they just want to break up the spots all among the city, so every high school gets a couple of spots, not taking into consideration the fact that a lot of kids have spent years studying and working hard in school to go there. So it's another huge issue, which is pitting the parents against the city, not the state in that case.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I'm going to say a couple quick things about this, and then we'll move on. Number one, this is part of a bigger agenda, and this ties, unfortunately, right into BLM and the Marxism movement. They've infiltrated the teachers' unions. They're trying to contribute to the curriculum of kids at these schools by introducing books like White Fragility to turn black kids against white kids. It's insane. And because of this agenda, this Marxist agenda, them trying to do what they're doing, like Nadler with these schools and and the oversight, it's not going to go away because they can't have one without the other. They have to have control to be able to do all these things, to indoctrinate kids to want to hate America. They don't even teach American history in so many schools anymore. It's insane. They're trying to rewrite history and come up with their some new history book, which is so far from the truth that parents all over are waking up to this, not just in New York, but across the country. So let's move on. I know that another issue is the aging infrastructure that you've got in New York, and I know you wanted to touch on that. Tell us a little bit about that.
I can briefly talk about that. So, it's funny, for a guy like Nadler, he's been talking about the Cross Harbor Rail Tunnel for almost his entire tenure, which is about 28 years, going into his 30th year. They've spent a significant amount of money on studies, and we finally have a president like President Trump, who would like to be the transportation president, and he never broached him on this subject. It's never come up. If you came to New York, we are a city that is growing, or was, and the infrastructure really can't keep up with the demands of this city. And that's where just a few weeks ago, we had a brownout here. But there's so many different areas where we need money.
Sure.
And I know it sounds like I'm asking for money, but that would be my job, okay, is to get money from my district. And if you came here and you saw the state of the bridges, some of these streets, which are trip hazards for seniors, and in fact, a lot of seniors walk with walkers, not because they need them, but because the streets are in such terrible condition.
Sure.
MTA, Con Ed, there's just a whole bunch of different issues that we have going on. They all seem to run together and create a lot of difficulties for New Yorkers.
Yeah, and if we're going to be giving money to illegals for paychecks to do nothing and to come into our country and infiltrate our schools and our hospitals, and we pay for all that, plus pay for their legal fees and all this nonsense, and then reparations and paying for all the damage done by the looting and burning, and now they want to do wealth redistribution. If we're going to pay for all that, why can't we put money into infrastructure before we do any of that? Okay.
Well, John, I'm just going to touch for 1 second on that, because I'm not sure, I run a very polite, respectful campaign, so I probably wouldn't use that words, but you mentioned something that folks should just take into consideration, is that when you have people who come to this country and illegally, and they're in our school system, there is a tremendous amount of money that is spent on teaching them to learn English. And I'd like, understand that at the same time that's going on, we have a very high rate of autism in this country.
Sure.
And people depend on the services within these public schools to help their kids. And we now have money coming out of that budget to help these kids learn English. So there's just not enough money in the system to help everyone. And in addition,
that's exactly.
Let me just finish. With these public classrooms, you have 25 kids in a classroom, okay, with one teacher. I had a really good friend of mine who volunteered. She was doing a reading program in Harlem, and she was supposed to be teaching the teachers how to teach a reading to the kids. Gets me upset when I think about this. And she said it was just the teachers were totally overwhelmed, with 25 kids. She said then another 5 kids would come in the classroom. They didn't speak English, and no one learned anything. So they were overwhelmed with the number of kids, and then the burden of trying to work with kids who weren't speaking English. So it's something to consider when you want to be compassionate towards other people. I ask that you also consider the children first in this country who need social services, and they're not getting it.
look. Look. If you have a home, don't you have to take care of your home first before you start taking care of others? It's simple math. If you only take in this much money, you can't overextend and pay out that much money. It doesn't add up. We can't afford open borders, illegal alien sanctuary cities when we've got all these other issues that we can't pay for now.
Right.
The math does not work.
We're compassionate people, but I just asked for us to be compassionate to our own children first.
Exactly. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. We've got homeless people on the street, veterans, people. We've got problems. We need to take care of America first. I want to move on to Israel.
Sure.
I obviously you're Jewish, Cathy. God bless you. But we've got anti-Semites like AOC, Tlaib, Omar, Presley that are pushing for Israel's destruction. And in Omar's and Tlaib's case, it's Islamic jihadist stealth jihad that they're using to infiltrate our government to bring on. They want things like Sharia law. Omar is in Minneapolis working with a guy like Keith Ellison, who's another Islamic jihadist. I know who these people are. As again, I'm a military veteran. I follow this very closely, and I've studied Islamic jihad, stealth jihad. I know exactly what these people are doing. And I don't have any sympathy for someone that's anti-Semitic, and all four of them should be gone. They don't have a place in Congress. It is absurd, hateful, and evil, the things that they say, not only against white people, but now also against Israel.
So I'm glad you brought that up. I might say it a little bit differently, but yes, these congresswomen have made anti-Semitic tropes. And I think what was really upsetting for me as a Jewish New Yorker is that my Jewish congressperson, Nadler, who is also Jewish, didn't bother to have a hearing for them. We have a hearing for Barr, where the guy can't get a word in, but we can't have a hearing for them. And, we had a Republican, his name just escapes my head, who made some racist remarks, and his leadership positions were taken away, and they have not had their leadership positions taken away. We also have anti-Semitism here in New York, and it's in different parts of Brooklyn where we have Hasidic Jews. The reason being that they're attacked is they're visibly Jewish. You can tell that they're Jewish by their clothing.
Sure.
And we had a march in January, and it was really fascinating because all the Democrats, came from New York, and they stood at the front of the march, and they held the banner, and we walked across the Brooklyn Bridge, and then they disappeared. And what the folks in Brooklyn were asking for was they needed more police. They needed a larger police presence because there could be a Hasidic man, say he's 50 years old, he's walking down the street, and he has the living daylights beaten out of him by four men.
Right.
So we need more police. And, what's just ironic here is you have them show up for the photo op, and then they decide, Nadler in particular, they're going to defund the police. So now we have less police to protect groups that really need the police. And, obviously I'm a strong advocate for the police, but, when you walk through New York here, there are a lot of attacks on synagogues that are prevented by our finest. And, it's reassuring when I walk by a synagogue or shul and I see a policeman standing there, because sometimes that's the deterrent you need from someone walking in with a gun or someone throwing a knapsack of bombs, which we had down in Chelsea.
I'll say.
And I mean, we're lucky and we're blessed to have the NYPD, but we need them more. We don't need them less. So I will say something that I'm sure a lot of viewers outside of New York don't know, and this is really disheartening. But there's a group. It's the New York Democratic Socialists, and they asked the city council. Okay, the city council, which those elections are in 2021. I have the wording down here. You have to sign a pledge if you want their support, and it's not to travel to Israel. And remember, this job has nothing to do with foreign affairs. It only has to do with New York City, the inner workings of New York City. So in the state with the largest Jewish population, New York City Council people have to sign a pledge that they won't travel to Israel, and also that they'll support the BDS movement. I wish people would really realize, and I speak to my fellow Jewish friends, that this is the most important election of our lifetime.
Yes, it is.
You might be a Democrat and feel that they're your party, but they're not the party for Israel anymore. The days where we work together, Republicans and Democrats, to support Israel are over. This new Democratic Party is openly anti-Semitic. And I think while you see defunding the police, next will be defunding Israel. Which is why I say to people, this is really the most important election of our lifetime.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And on top of that, the Democrats, they have no shame. They banned God at the 2012 DNC. They banned God out of our Pledge of Allegiance and our national anthem just a couple weeks ago at this year's DNC, and they do what's called a bait and switch. So they'll hold the sign up and march with you, and then they're gone, and they need that photo op so that they can use that to lie to their constituents and say, see, we supported Israel, and then they go right behind your back and talk about don't go to Israel. Okay, so the Democrats are liars.
Well, you know what? I belong to AIPAC, and I also belong to the RJC, the Republican Jewish Coalition. And what I always found interesting about AIPAC, it's a very warm group of people. It's Democrats and Republicans. Everyone comes together, and we would have political leaders from both sides of the party come and speak to us. In 2016, Bernie Sanders said he wasn't going to come. He had a commitment. And now in 2020, they basically openly decided they weren't showing up. And I mean, they're not hiding it. They're telling us this is the new Democratic Party. We are not for Israel.
Exactly. See, that's what I'm saying. This Marxist agenda to destroy America has taken firm hold now. So now they don't have to hide it anymore because it's out there. So now it's all about destroying every fabric of our society, whether it's attacking Israel or it's going after the schools and our children, or it's the cities, the sanctuaries, the open borders. They attack every inch of every issue every day, 24 hours a day. And it's a hate-filled agenda that will destroy America if Americans don't stand up and stop it. We're going to move on. I want to talk about, just hit on this again, about the homeless population, and also because of the looting and the rioting and the burning, the small businesses that are hurting in New York City, and the insurance, the insurance companies being contacted once, no payment. They have to get contacted a second time,
So there's a lot of different issues in there. So I'm going to jump back for a second because I am a New Yorker. I have a lot of Republican friends. I have a lot of Democratic friends. I don't think that my Democratic friends are planning the downfall of the U.S., but I think it's great to sort of enlighten them that these policies will not bring our country forward. All right, I want to jump to the homeless population.
Okay.
So it's interesting. it's probably the reason why I'm running. About 2 years ago, I decided to run because I really wasn't getting anywhere in terms of helping the homeless. My background is social activism, but also I've spent a lot of time helping various charities throughout Manhattan and in Harlem. And this has been a very frustrating issue. There's a lot of different overlaps here. That being said, when I started and now it's night and day. The homeless population has gotten exponentially worse.
Sure.
But let's jump back to when I was starting to run in 2019. I'll just tell you the Coalition for the Homeless gave New York City an F for handling. We have folks that are living on the street. There's different segments of the population that are there. What happened was, well, let me just describe the different segments. I mean, we have a small percentage that lost their home, so it's an affordable housing issue. We also have another issue that have alcohol and drug issues. And then I'd say we had the third group that are seriously mentally ill. And I think all of these groups are very sad, but I think for the mentally ill who aren't even aware of where they are sometimes, when they are one day properly medicated, I think they'll look back in absolute horror of the life they lived picking through garbage because no one cared enough to get them the psychiatric medication that they needed. And that's part of, there's this sort of liberal philosophy that we should adjust to the homeless, okay?
Sure.
And they need to educate us about living with the homeless. So it's very sad, and there's a lot of different reasons for why we have such a large homeless population. A lot of it goes back to deinstitutionalization, where the federal government and the state tried to sort of push this back down, really, and then really the state tried to push it back down.
Sure.
We also have Medicaid that doesn't pay for long-term hospital stays unless it's under 16 days or under 15 beds. So it's a very small segment that Medicaid will actually pay for. President Trump actually changed that for opioid use.
Yeah.
And again, he is a president who I believe is willing to work with you if you reach across the aisle and say,
Yes.
We have an issue, please help us. Instead
Yes.
of having a congressman who has spent all his time trying to get him thrown out of office and take away our vote. What happened recently that expanded the population was, for example, where I live on the Upper West Side, they decided because of COVID that they were going to empty the shelters. Now, the interesting thing about the emptying of the shelters is if you look at a graph of what went on in New York, it's sort of like this. We had a peak and then it came straight down. And we're more like this now. We're very flat. And granted, a lot of that were elderly, which, is heartbreaking.
Let me ask you.
Let me just say, so they took this homeless population from the shelters because they decided they needed to socially distance, and they put them in hotels across the city. Some areas got more than others. In addition, sort of like a perfect storm, they also released a lot of people from Rikers.
Yes.
People that had no home, nowhere to go. People that were receiving psychiatric medication that they don't receive anymore. Right. And so that group sort of joined in. And I'll just discuss the 3 hotels in this area. One is on West 86, one is on West 79th, and one is on West 77th. They're all off Broadway. In addition, we have 2 homeless shelters on Columbus in the 80s. If you're from Manhattan, this will all make sense because it's a 10-block radius.
Sure.
So we now have all of those groups on the Hotel Belle Claire on West 77th Street. And it's interesting, I broke the story. But I noticed some public masturbation, which I'm sure anybody in, Iowa would be horrified, but it's a daily sight here. But what I noticed was the man who was looking at a child, and I thought, that's really off. I came home and I went to my sex offender list, which, I'm a mom, I look at. Sure. And we went from having 4 to 18. And 14 of them were in this hotel. And of those 14, 13 of them had raped children. Okay? Of the person who had not raped a child, he had kidnapped a woman in her 30s and raped her.
That's sick.
4 of them were level 3 sex offenders. They're not allowed to be within 1,000 feet of a school. This hotel was within 1,000 feet of 2 schools, 3 schools, and 2 playgrounds. Okay? Then they came out and said, oh, I called up the police, and it took a while, the 20th precinct, and I finally got them. And I said, do you know that there are 14 sex offenders, 4 of them level 3, 13 of them child rapists, living in the Hotel Belleclaire? And they said no. And I said, why not? And they said, no one told us. So
they should know. They should know.
They should know. So then it was a mistake. We didn't know. They moved out the level 3 offenders. We still have sex offenders there. I'm still waiting for somebody to tell the parents. And, I just want to address this because, a lot of people say this is a class issue. Oh, the wealthy don't want this. Yes, there are some wealthy here. Central Park West, for example, is a very wealthy neighborhood. But we also have some affordable housing in this district. We also have middle-class parents, okay? We have people that work during the day and they leave their kids at home. We have parents that let their kids walk on the street by themselves. I was a super strict parent, but a lot of parents are not like me, okay? And they let their kids walk on the street. Shouldn't someone have been notified that they were there?
Yes.
All right, that's that hotel. Then we have the Hotel Lucerne on West 79th. They put over 300 people there who have serious drug and alcohol issues. There's no methadone clinic in the neighborhood. And they basically very aggressively panhandle. Well, let me jump back. I just want to say this. So they're put in the hotels because of COVID, all right, to socially distance.
Sure.
Yet they all congregate together. They don't wear a mask, which is against New York state law. And then they aggressively panhandle in your face to get money. Meanwhile, they've had COVID there. And I'm going to use the word quotes because this is what the councilwoman said. Minimum COVID. So you're supposed to, if you've been exposed to COVID, you're supposed to quarantine for 14 days. No one's quarantined there. They come out on Broadway. They are shooting up, doing drugs. There's a lot of theft. And in some way, I'm not putting the blame on these people, okay? They're not provided any services. They're in the wrong housing. They never should have put in a neighborhood with children. We have hotels at JFK or LaGuardia. They're not being used because nothing's going on at the airports. They could have housed them there. And in addition, and here's the kicker, if you want to talk about tax money, these are some of the most expensive hotels on the Upper West Side. They're friends with the Lucerne owner is friends with de Blasio. And they're the ones who got this contract. Now, if they didn't have this population in the hotel, they would have 0 people staying because no one is coming to visit New York right now. We really don't have any tourism. And why would you want to come to New York City today with what's going on, with crime that's out of control?
Yeah, they're leaving.
Right. So anyway, I summed up the homeless question a bit, but we basically... And what angers me about this is, Jerry Nadler will go down to the ICE facilities on the southern border and he'll check, the parents are separated. They didn't have adequate food. These are people that came into the country. He has not one day walked along Broadway and seen people living in squalor. That's just this area. In Hell's Kitchen, they also have homeless shelters. They have homeless encampments. And again, if you're a little boy, a little girl, you don't, you're thinking, what do I want to be in life? I want to be a fireman. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a teacher. I don't want to be you don't think, let me grow up as a homeless person.
Yeah. And let me just say something. Look, America is the land of opportunity. We're not the provider of the world. Okay. I have a very compassionate heart. I have love in my heart. but there's only so much that one person or one country can do. And again, we aren't even taking care of our own people. Okay? That's why we're in this mess, because you have the Democrats want to let all these people in illegally, by the way. Like you said, down at the border, Nadler goes down there, but these people, we didn't ask them to come.
Right. I mean, that's a little, for me, it's always sort of an enigma that, they are upset about the conditions, but they came here. But the fact is, the money that is being used towards the homeless, the money's not being even used correctly. These people need psychiatric help.
Yeah.
And what also is going on is the police are not enforcing Kendra's law, which is if someone is a danger to themselves or a danger to others, they get taken off the street and they're provided psychiatric help.
Yeah.
There's so many loopholes now to go through this that they've made it very difficult. And so instead we have people on the street. The guy that you referenced in the beginning who punched out an elderly woman, I think he was arrested numerous times and was not on his medication.
Well, there's been more than one. It's happening a lot. Okay.
There's a very famous one that I thought you were referencing.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them that are famous now, because I just saw one yesterday where the guy he was walking to his house and he got hit with a brick over the head. Guy snuck up behind him. So look, this is only
John, let me just jump in. Last comment. What's interesting is criminals don't, and this all has to do with bail reform, which Jerry Nadler is for. If you're for bail reform, vote for him. Don't vote for me. If you're for letting prisoners out of jail, vote for him. Don't vote for me.
Right.
These have complicated the problems, but people who commit crimes don't always stay in the same neighborhood. We had on Lexington and 63rd. It's a very nice area. It's on the east side. We had a guy Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Woman was coming home from work. He tried to rape her on the subway platform while everybody was watching. And then the other day downtown, we had a judge. Yeah, we had a judge who was walking to work and got clocked in the head by a guy. And my question is, these are crimes against women. So why is it 2020 and women are being harassed and women are being assaulted in New York City? If you go to work, you're not allowed to harass someone at the office, but somehow it's open season on women here. And while I'm at it, talking about the bail reform, domestic violence is part of what you would get out for. Who do you think they're going for when they get out of jail? Or if they don't stay in jail, they're going right back. And that woman doesn't have a personal bodyguard like these politicians do. And there's not enough police.
Yeah. And just real quick, we've got about 6 minutes left. So
sorry, I told you I tend to tangent.
That's okay. I'm gonna go real quick here on a couple things. Number one, panhandling is going to be the least of New Yorkers' concerns. That's just going to be the beginning. Okay. Because they're removing police officers now. They've removed the special investigations unit, and they're not recruiting new officers. They're taking those away. So
they canceled 2 classes.
Yeah. So the numbers are going to dwindle to be able to deal with these issues. So I'm going to move on, but it's not going to get any better with de Blasio in charge. I want to move on to the post office debacle and the election that was held there. That how many weeks did it take? And it looks to me like a fraudulent election.
So you're referring to the race on the east side, which is Carolyn Maloney's race.
Yes.
And what's interesting about that race is New York City is a Democratic city, and this was a Democratic primary. So no one can claim that there was fraud from the Republican side.
Right.
I don't think we're really set up for a system like this. I would say to everyone out there, I'm going to change the subject a little bit and talk about being a poll worker. I've been a poll worker for many years. It's not a fun job. You have to start at 5 and end at 10. But I would encourage everybody, if you're physically up to it and good physical health, to try to be a poll worker this year.
Sure.
Because we never have enough Republicans at the polls.
Yeah.
In Manhattan.
And I know that hopefully, like, I don't trust it either. And with 80 million proposed ballots going out nationwide, hitting all these cities, it's going to be wrought with corruption. I don't trust it. And to be honest with you, if you're voting conservative Republican for Trump, or if you're voting for Cathy Bernstein or Republican in any city during this election, go to the polls and make sure that you cast your ballot in person. Do not allow the Democrats the opportunity to corrupt this election with their nonsense. One last thing. I want to talk about the censorship on Twitter. I know that was a concern of yours. You want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, John, thank you. So I'm glad you brought that up, because if you look at my Twitter, I am running on the conservative line. And what's really very disheartening is that Twitter has pulled away the New York Conservative Party's Twitter. They can't tweet anymore. They have hundreds of candidates running in New York State. It's, we're 2 months out from an election, and yet they can't tweet. It seems it's just very odd who they're pulling it out from. And in fact, I wrote it down here. This was a day ago. It's still up there, even though I made a complaint. There is an individual, I can't pronounce his name, is Kamani, KHAMENEI.IR. It's got 815,000 followers, so it's a big account. And he has comments in there of filthy Zionist agents, Jewish members of the Trump family. And here we are. I'm sure many people have complained, and Twitter still has not taken it down.
Of course
but
not.
It's very frustrating, because I have people on Twitter who I'm not even sure what the word is, or inappropriate with me, or disrespectful, and use language that it could be considered harmful. And I report them, and their Twitter account is still there.
Oh yeah.
And yet other people who are Republicans who write something that could be pro-Trump get their accounts taken down. And what else is interesting is I probably lose 100 followers a day right now.
Of course.
Because people are losing their accounts. But I'll tell you, just as a funny aside, I'm running against Jerry Nadler. And on the Democratic side, there were 5 people who were running against him. All 5 of them got their infamous blue check mark. It's like the Holy Grail. Only 2 of them actually got there. I didn't get a check mark until just recently, although I did ask Twitter, a couple of dozen times. And there just seems to be different rules for Republicans and conservatives than there are for Democrats. But the part where they seem to be an editor now, you really can't have it both ways. You can't be an editor and also receive immunity under, that provision 230. But yet it doesn't seem like the Democrats are really addressing this.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Twitter is the news medium.
Yeah. This all ties in to this, what I've been explaining throughout the thread here and on other shows, that there's a Marxist, racist movement going on right now. And if people don't know about it, you better wake up, because it's happening right underneath your nose. And anybody with a brain or common sense should know by now what's happening. But it's hate for me, but not for thee. So someone can hate you. They can be anti-Semitic. They can be racist against you. They can hold your religion against you, get you fired from your job, cancel culture. But as soon as you say a word that they don't like, boom. So look, thank you so much for coming on the show today, Cathy. And by the way, just so you know, everybody, at the bottom of the screen, Cathy's website, Cathy Bernstein for Congress.com. And you can reach Cathy on Twitter at Cathy for Congress.
No, just at Cathy Congress.
Sorry, or at Cathy Congress is her Twitter handle. Make sure that you guys reach out, especially if you're in Manhattan, if you're in New York. Cathy could use contributions, help with the ground game. Let's defeat Jerry Nadler. If you want to get rid of Jerry Nadler, here is your opportunity, New York. Do you really want Jerry Nadler to be the representative in District 10? I got to tell you, if I was living in New York, I would be knocking on doors to get him out. So let's do everything we can to get Cathy Bernstein elected and replace Jerry Nadler in Congress this election. So again, website is Cathy Bernstein for Congress.com. Please go to that website and help Cathy win. God bless you, Cathy.
God bless you. God bless the state of New York. Thank you.
And thank you for coming on Indivisible. Folks, we've got another show tonight after this one with Cathy. We've got Rhonda Furnan coming on. She is running for governor in California against Gavin Newsom. That show will be at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight. Until then, we will see you. God bless you.
Thank you again, John. Appreciate your time.